Joining us now is writer and broadcaster Esther Krakue. Esther, Harry's in Canada at the moment. He's done an interview with Good Morning America. What did he have to say, and was it really wise for him to do it, do you think?
So Harry gave the interview to Will Reeve with Good Morning America to advertise the sort of 1 year coming up of the Invictus Games, which will be held next year. Now, obviously, we couldn't avoid the topic, or certainly he couldn't, about King Charles. He obviously flew over the moment he found out about King Charles's cancer diagnosis. And so Will did ask him, you know, what is going on. Thankfully, Harry didn't reveal anything about the King's condition. I'm pretty sure the palace and most of Britain were holding on with bated breath, hoping Harry doesn't revert to his usual blabbermouth antics and just reveal all like he did in Spare. Thankfully, he said, you know, obviously he's not at liberty to talk about that. And then he did say, Will asked him whether illnesses can bring families together and whether it's something that could happen in this case. And Harry said, yes, you know, that is certainly possible. Now, I don't know what grass Harry has been smoking to think that his scorched earth tactic with the release of his book Spare and the Netflix series and the Oprah interview somehow in any way, shape or form will still leave an avenue open for him to go back to the royal family in any significant measure. We know that, you know, William and Harry are still not on speaking terms. I suspect his stepmother is probably not very keen on him either, given the things he wrote about her in his book. So for him to say that, you know, it is possible that King Charles's illness will bring the family together, either he's extremely deluded or he's under the influence of some substance, because for most people, they don't think that's a possibility. And I mean, I spoke to my father about this actually, and you know, people say he's a traditional West African man, but he was like, if you did what Harry's done to me, I would probably disown you. And King Charles famously did tell William and Harry at Prince Philip's funeral to not make the last few years of his life a misery, and Harry still has. So I really don't understand kind of on what basis he thinks that he has a way of reconciling with his family.
That takes me to my next point. You know, this idea has since been floated about him returning to royal duties temporarily while the king is out of action. That hasn't been too well received, has it?
It hasn't been, and it's highly, highly unlikely. I mean, alongside probably, you know, Prince Andrew's and a long list of deplorables in the past, Prince Harry is probably one of the most disliked men in Britain. He's still technically a councillor of state, but since he's not an active working royal alongside Prince Andrew, he will not be called up to take on any duties. And this is something that the palace has probably made clear, that it would be very unlikely, especially given the influence that William will have. William will inherit his father's role. I suspect he feels a sense of duty to actually just keeping the royal family and the monarchy in a place that's not just, you know, just a gossip fest, basically. And so I think that the royal family knows that it wouldn't go down too well with the British public. They're not tone deaf. I mean, that's one of the reasons why the institution has survived for as long as it has. You know, public opinion does matter. But it doesn't surprise me that there are these allegations that Prince Harry would be happy to step in. You have to remember when he and Meghan decided to step back from being active members of the royal family, they actually wanted to have sort of a hybrid working model. So have a life in North America where they could have some sort of privacy, but also undertake duties on behalf of the monarch as and when they could. And this was a proposal that was firmly rejected. You know, you can't have one foot in and one foot out. And so in many ways they felt forced out. So I'm not surprised that that's an idea that Prince Harry would be completely against. But at the end of the day, you know, the status quo has calcified. There's too much that has happened. Prince Harry will not be received well, and neither will his wife, who I'm assuming most people probably liken her to Yoko Ono in many ways. So it's not something that would happen, absolutely not. And Prince William would certainly not let it happen.
Now, Esther, we understand that while Harry is in Canada, he's meeting with First Nations people about the Crown's commitment to indigenous people. Look, I appreciate the sentiment, but is it really appropriate?
It's not really appropriate because it depends on what the capacity with which he's going and having this meeting with the indigenous people for. I mean, one of the things he did say was that politicians have not taken the plight of indigenous people as seriously. They keep promising that they will, but they haven't. The question is, what is Prince Harry, planning on doing about that? We know that King Charles has been very vocal and apologetic about the past discrimination and abuse that indigenous people have faced. You know, there have been instances where their children have been removed from their communities forcibly, and you know, there have been documented abuses by the churches that they've been forced to join. So it's a very serious issue, and it's something that's dear to the king's heart. Now the question is, why is Harry treading down this path? And it's because it's something that, you know, he feels the need to feel like he's doing good, he's making an impact. I think one of the things that was quite telling about his interview with Will Reeve and Good Morning Britain, and I don't think that's something that people have really picked up on, is when he was interviewing, he was saying that the Invictus Games and what he feels like he's doing is his fix. It gives him a sense of duty and purpose, and you really have to kind of draw parallels between that and what he's now trying to do by meeting the indigenous peoples, and what it means and what it signifies, particularly given his past as someone who was an active member of the royal family. He had a lot of really significant patronages and charitable concerns, and that status that being in the royal family has afforded him is now gone. But he feels this void that he has to do something that he thinks is for the public good and for the public benefit. So it's effectively his fix in a way. It's like, you know, a drug addict that's addicted to doing good, but he's kind of lost his way a bit because he's no longer part of the institution that facilitated that kind of influence anymore. I don't think it's particularly appropriate. But again, this is someone who's effectively a rogue royal. He can do what he wants. And him and Meghan are on like the third or fourth rebrand. They're still trying to figure things out. I'm sure they're aware that mistakes have been made. So this is just his way of doing it. The problem comes when, you know, there's really kind of no finesse or decorum behind it. Meeting a prime minister who is clearly a Republican prime minister who's trying to get his country to exit the Commonwealth, and now he's meeting indigenous peoples and harking on about something that King Charles has been very clear about. You really have to wonder what his angle is, but actually he's like he said, he's trying to get his fix.
Now, Meghan has also announced a new project this week, another podcast. What is she embarking on, and how is it different from what she's done before?
So we know that Meghan's podcast with Spotify, their $20 million contract was cancelled after one season of Archetypes, apparently because it didn't meet certain production standards. But I'm also suspecting that Spotify were cognizant of the fact that her star had sort of waned a little bit. Now she's signed with a new deal with Lemonada, which produces, which is a female-owned company, which produces the podcast of the likes of Sarah Silverman. She's very excited about this. She clearly wants to kind of go down the podcast route. But again, you do have to question whether this will be a success, at least as they're hoping for, what even their definition of success is. Meghan's podcast didn't particularly get rave reviews, and it's quite strange because if you think about it, she's like the darling of Western feminism. But there were actually many critics that criticized her podcast and her attitude towards feminism, and said it was mainly centered on herself and her own experiences and how she felt good doing what she was doing, and it wasn't actually linked to the plight of women, certainly in the West, but not around the world either. So you have to wonder kind of what her angle is. I always suspected that, you know, her leaving the royal family was probably for the best because she now has the freedom to explore these sorts of things. But whether it'll be a success is different. I think it's actually quite telling that Spotify cancelled the whole deal with her. I mean, if you can't really sell yourself, which is effectively your only unique selling point, what really do you have to sell? I mean, they're moving into production and trying to create content, but you know, as anyone will tell you, Hollywood and the business of content creation is a brutal game. They're not going to have the same kid gloves that they had really in the royal family, where they have this machine of the firm that can massage their public image. Anything they put out will be scrutinized. Anything they do will be scrutinized, and they don't have that cushion of the royal family to fall back on. And I suspect it's going to be the same with this podcast.
Esther Krakue, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.